This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born or to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. So with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. And it's very special, actually, for me to be giving this talk this evening. And I'm hoping that I can perhaps reflect a little bit on my, seems like many, many years of practice that I've learned through trial and error on my journey in meditation, some things that may be really helpful for you as well. I might have some suggestions about how to really stay focused and grounded when this world can seem actually quite turbulent and unstable. And it was interesting that the last 2 weeks, some of the things that were mentioned in the talks with Ajahns Brahmali and Sunya were things that I was thinking of sharing today. So I think you'll find that I will just expand on some of what they were teaching just recently. There's a few points that I'd like to make, I think particularly from my own personal experience. And this is particularly about how to work with the past, the present, and the future. But first of all, I thought I'd just mention a little bit about my history. Chris gave a little bit of an overview, and I come from an occupational therapy health background and worked for many years in that as well, and alongside with my meditation practice. And now I'm in my 70s, and it's been quite interesting to see that I've been able to have a sense of settling back actually into my life and finding that there's kind of an unexpected peacefulness and contentment that I haven't actually noticed before. And I was telling an Australian nun in the Tibetan tradition, who's a friend of mine, how I was feeling this deep contentment some of the time now, and how kind of interesting it really is to experience this. And she said something that's really quite interesting. She said, this is the fruits of practice after my years of dedication to the Dhamma. And I was quite surprised that she said that. And I actually thought about it a little bit and realized, yes, that's quite true, that I am experiencing perhaps fruits of this practice over decades and decades. And also acknowledging it hasn't always been so. And life has definitely not been easy at times. And I think that reflects where I felt deep, sort of a deep opening, I guess, of the heart the first time I actually sat my first retreat. And I had been for probably all of my 20s exploring different yoga and meditation and searching for something and not quite finding anything that really connected deeply with my heart. And then I met who was the person who was to become my future husband. And one of the first things he said is, let's go and do a retreat together. And I thought that was such a great idea because I'd been waiting. And it turned out that a wonderful Burmese teacher was coming to Perth to run a 10-day meditation retreat. And so we went and sat it together. And it was difficult. You know, it was one of those retreats where you sit for 1 hour, then you sit another hour, and then you sit another hour. And there's not much movement, there's not much walking. So physically, it was quite exhausting. But something was deeply connecting with me at that point. And I started to think, what was it that I really resonated with? And I realized that it was actually something that was so deeply intuitive, but I'd never heard anyone talk about it before. And of course, that was the first noble truth of dukkha. And that was something I was so relieved to hear. And so I'd just like to read my summary of that, just to reconnect you with what that actually is. So the noble truth of dukkha. Birth, aging, death are dukkha. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are dukkha. Association with the unbeloved is dukkha, and separation from the loved ones is dukkha. Not getting what is wanted is dukkha. So all of these things actually are quite powerful, and we will all experience them because we've been born and because we're going to die. And in the middle of that, we will be experiencing a lot of different relationships with suffering or dissatisfaction or whatever we might be experiencing through that sense of suffering in a global sense. I loved also that there was this other lovely word that came up with dukkha, and that was sukha. And sukha is really about the happiness that comes when we are no longer caught in dissatisfaction or suffering in some way. And sukha also refers to contentment and a lasting happiness. What I really understood when first retreat was that happiness really isn't to be found in material possessions or relationships or the job that we have, because these don't last. And that's why they're so unsatisfying. So this is where I was connecting deeply. And after that retreat, my partner, who had been meditating for 8 years before this, and I decided to commit that we would try and do a retreat together every year, and that we would also try and sit together every day. And I thought at the time, wow, that's a pretty big commitment, actually. And yet we managed it most of the time. I must admit that initially he was extremely committed and dedicated. So I tended to borrow his dedication, because I found that if I could use his energy and his commitment, it would get me to sit on the cushion each day, and it would get me to commit to go to retreats. And then eventually I found that I had my own faith and confidence, and I would sit naturally at any rate. So some of the things that helped over the years, the first few years, to build that faith and confidence, one of them particularly was that I realized that meditation really isn't just for me or just about me. I'm always in relationship to others, even when I'm on a retreat. Of course, we're always in relationship. And so the practice really includes the care and happiness of family and friends, and then can expand outwards even further. It's sometimes hard to see, isn't it, what practice really is about and how it can benefit others. So how can actually sitting on a cushion for 30 minutes or being in a walking practice up and down and noticing how we place our foot, or offering metta, do these things really help others, or are they something that's just happening in our own mind and heart? And I think what's helpful is to realize and look more and investigate more deeply to understand that if we can really connect with and start to clearly know our own minds and our own habit patterns as well, but particularly our own minds, then we can start to really understand the minds of others. All of us are human beings, and we all experience suffering, and we all sometimes experience when there is no suffering. Knowing this, I think, and knowing that in ourselves helps us to feel compassion and care for others. There's this sense of the inevitability of unwanted experiences at times, and we struggle at times. Now, I deeply appreciated hearing a description of the inevitability of unwanted experiences. And one of my mentors and teachers, Joseph Goldstein, had shared that idea that, sometimes in life, we are inevitably going to have difficulties. And suffering just occurs. And there's nothing wrong with us because we might experience these difficulties. And it's also not wrong to want to get rid of discomfort or pain and to try and alleviate it. It's perfectly natural to want to do that. So we can sort of give ourselves a little break at times. One of the examples for me recently is that the last couple of years, I've been dealing with a lot of quite uncomfortable back pain. And it's created a lot of difficulties in what I can do and what I can't do. And I've really struggled with this. So I had physiotherapy, and I've used my years of practice with meditation to help sort of soften around the repercussions of this chronic back pain and to see if I could open to it and be with it, rather than constantly trying to get rid of it and getting upset because I have this pain. So this is really helpful. And I started to realize, well, of course I should. I'm aging. This body is getting old. This body really can't handle a lot of the things I used to do when I was 20 or 30 or 40. Why am I expecting that it's still going to be the same? So I had to do a lot of little changes, and things like I always used to sit to meditate on a cushion on the floor. Can't do that anymore. Now I have to sit in a chair because the back just doesn't like that. And I've started to see these little things. And sometimes I can be open and accommodating and accepting that this is the way it is, and I have some pain, and sometimes it's not there and sometimes it is. But sometimes that's just too hard to do. When it gets too much, then I find I need to just distract myself and find some ways to give a little bit of nurturing to myself. So I might go down to the beach and just float in the water for a while and sort of take the mind away from the oppressive feeling that this is a limiting factor, this pain that I'm experiencing. I like the suggestion that Ajahn Sunyot mentioned last week to sort of be very kind to ourselves and think sometimes that this body is just good enough as it is. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say, that sort of it maybe can't accept it necessarily, but we can sort of say, oh, this is just the body as it is right now, and this is enough. So our practice can also be of benefit to others through transforming how we act and how we speak. And so that sense of sila is very vital in our practice. And for me personally, I've learned over many years that if I can be calm and patient and kind, perhaps before speaking or acting, then that will have an influence on how others respond to me. And this has been particularly important in the work that I do, particularly in hospice and palliative care, where people are very sensitive to how you're listening to them, how you're talking to them. So if I was to be in a rushed, energetic state, very busy when I went to sit down and talk to people, they would respond differently to me from if I just came in with all the time in the world to sit with them and to listen, and was just calm and patient. And I would suggest you try that for yourself and just notice if you have that energy, how do people respond to you? Even if you're shopping, for example, and you're waiting in line in the supermarket, you can become incredibly impatient. But how does that feel, and how does that rub off on the people around you and when you get home into the family, as opposed to when you feel calm, quiet? And this is just how it is. There's no point getting impatient. It's not going to make things happen more quickly. So I realized that how I am affects other people around me, and conversely, how other people are can really affect me. If I'm agitated, then the energy expands outwards. So how we are in the world has an impact. There was a little quote by Joseph Goldstein that I'll read. It is said that on a boat in the middle of a great storm, one balanced and calm person can bring everyone to safety. The world can be like that boat, tossed by the storms of greed and hatred and fear. Can we be one of those people who help to keep it safe? So I'd like to just talk a little bit now about what is living wisely. And each week when I come to this group, I think of how fortunate we are to have the monks teaching the words of the Buddha and talking about how to stay in balance and how to work with the precepts with wise reflection. And they remind us often that just in case we might forget, that the Buddha was actually teaching a path of happiness and a path of freedom. He taught the way to be generally happy in a lasting and peaceful way. And I remember looking back on all of my retreats, there were usually so many instructions to do. And probably each week you might find that here, different people give different teachings and different instructions. And it's hard to remember them all and work out what is actually important in all of this. And what I found, one very helpful translation of the word sati, which is often translated as mindfulness. And there's another word or translation for the word sati, S-A-T-I, and that is to remember to be present. Just to remember to be present. And so whenever we get lost, whenever we get caught up in stories, wherever we get caught up in lots of reminiscing or whatever, just to notice that, not give ourselves a hard time, and remember to come back to the breath, to come back to the body. That's all. Just remembering to come back to the present. So what does present really mean? It means that we can act and speak with care and with skill, rather than being distracted and mindless. We can be very careful and present. And there's a wonderful Buddhist text that's called One Fine Night that I'll read now. It's a translation by Ajahn Sujato from Sutta Central. He says that it's a powerful and popular set of verses on practice. So it's very relevant to our practice. Don't run back to the past. Don't hope for the future. What's past is left behind. The future's not arrived. And phenomena in the present are clearly seen in every case. Knowing this, foster it. Immovable, unshakable. Today's the day to do the work. Who knows? Tomorrow may bring death. For there is no bargain to be struck with death and his mighty hordes. The peaceful sage explained, it's those who keenly meditate like this, not slacking off by night or day, who truly have that one fine night, meaning Nibbana. So I wonder if this is relevant for you. Can you remember to clearly see things in the present? I must admit that I spend a lot of time planning the future. I might be planning for tomorrow, or I might be planning for when I'm actually 90. Or I spend a lot of time regretting something, and it might be something that I said or did yesterday or when I was 18. And honestly, I must admit that I really enjoy making plans. Somehow plans seem to be soothing for my mind often. It seems to reinforce a sense of me and my story. I seem to spend hours lost planning my next retreat or my next holiday or where I'm going to go for my next meal. All these things I find quite entrancing. And I wondered whether actually what I'm doing is soothing the mind instead of worrying, because the other tendency I have a lot is worrying. So somehow the planning seems to feel as if I'm controlling the worrying. And maybe you can relate to those two things as well. I remember on one retreat, I spent days and days planning how I could go home because the retreat was freezing. So I wasn't really doing anything except thinking about how on earth I could get home from this retreat that I was on. So I know that planning is a familiar habit. And one of my teachers and friends, Kamala Masters, once described it as empty echoes in the mind. And that was quite a beautiful thing for me to hold. You know, the planning, there's not much you can do about the future. They're empty echoes just bouncing around in my mind. And there are very familiar themes that keep cycling with planning, and perhaps you know that as well. So let's look just briefly at the first section. Don't run back to the past. What's past is left behind. So that's a very profound statement, I think. When I think about what the past means, I think of the past as something that's back there. For some reason, it's back over my shoulder. You tend to look behind it to the past. And it might have images of people or memories of events that occurred months or weeks or days ago. And it's back behind me somehow. But one important thing to realize about the past is that it's actually gone. There's not much I can do about it. It's actually completely gone. However, past events obviously have an important influence on the present. On retreats sometimes, we do a lot of life reviews. And we might have moments, or we might spend hours remembering things that we did in the past. And sometimes there can be very painful things that come up and have enormous sadness or regret about something that happened that we said in the past to somebody that really hurt them. And we might really, really wish that we hadn't done those things and hope that we'll never do them again. So the wonderful thing is that we can learn from the past and we can learn from our mistakes. Thank goodness. So we can actually then have a realization, and I had this at some point, and it was just so helpful for me to realize that now, when I'm reflecting or remembering painful things from the past, I am not there in the past, but I'm actually here now, remembering them. So when I feel overwhelmed about certain things that were there, I'm not that 18-year-old girl now who made so many mistakes. I'm here at this age remembering that young girl who is really quite innocent and had no idea about the consequences of some of her actions. And what I can feel then is a lot of compassion for her at that time. So I'd like to say that there's wise reflection and there's unwise reflection about the past. The wise reflection is remembering the past and seeing if we can make sense of it and learn from it. And unwise reflection is seeing things that have happened as if they were still happening in the present. In terms of the things we may regret doing, we can use those past experiences to make different choices. And this is where we can learn and change, because being open to the Dhamma and being on this path of practice now, these causes and conditions have come together so that we are in a position to make much more wise decisions. And this is a profound thing to do. So I'm just aware now that it's time to actually do some practice. I think I've been talking for long enough. And what I'd like to do is just get you to stretch a little bit. We've been sitting. Just take a couple of minutes if you'd like to just stand and stretch, or sit and change your posture, and we'll begin the meditation. I recently been listening to some talks on responses to climate change. And one was, some of the teachings have been given by a German Pali scholar, Bhikkhu Analayo, who now lives in the US. And I'm going to offer a little bit of one of his meditation practices, which is bringing in the idea of the earth element into this meditation that we're going to do now. And this is a way of getting in touch with the body and the earth and feeling really grounded through a body scan, where we touch into all those areas in the body and have a sense of their heaviness and their solidity as we move through the body. But I will instruct you in this. So first of all, just settle in with a comfortable position and reflect on everything that has brought you to this moment, this evening. You just find your body posture, and then once you're sitting or lying comfortably, have a sense of softening again, a little bit more into your posture. Find a way to soften and relax. And reflect on your intention to be here this evening and to connect with others in this group. And perhaps to have some insight into your mind more clearly, or simply to take time out to rest. Really honor this deep intention. It's so wonderful that we have the good fortune to connect with each other in this way. So enjoy this time of meditation and how special it is. Begin to sense your body and feel its weight on the cushion or the chair. This weight is connected to the earth. Feel the sense of gravity of the earth, offering stability, just a place to be. Be aware of the area around the heart and any emotions that you feel there. See what is present right now. If nothing's clear, that's okay. Just notice any tiredness, any thoughts, any confusion. Whatever is happening is okay right now. Practice isn't about changing our experiences. It's increasing our ability to be with what is, to accept and allow, to make space to hold these thoughts and feelings. Be aware of the mind and any thoughts in the mind. Does the mind feel tight or relaxed? Is there a sense of hurry or stress? You get lost in thoughts. No problem. Just remember to come back. Aware of the body, aware of the breathing. And as you breathe, incline the mind to calmness. With the in-breath, be aware of the body and what's happening inside you. And then relax into the silence as you breathe out. Aware as you breathe in and aware as you breathe out. You might notice sounds in the room or around you. Notice how the sounds come and go. And then you might be aware also of silence. Listening to the silence, feeling the stillness around you and within. We'll do a body scan now and feel this body as we move through it with its bones, its hair, its teeth and organs. And just be aware of the heaviness of the body, the solidity of the body, connecting with the earth element. Bring attention to the top of the head and the forehead, the back of the head. Aware of the whole of the back of the head, top of the head, forehead, and a sense of solidity or heaviness. There's no need to strain. Just be aware of that sense of solidity or heaviness. Naturally there. Feel the forehead, down through the eyes, the cheeks, the nose, the mouth, the jaw, the whole front of the head. Aware of any sense of stillness or solidity, heaviness, the earth element. Move attention to the throat and to both shoulders. The weight of the shoulders, perhaps, down through the arms, down to the wrists, the hands, and the fingers and thumbs. And the sense of the arms and the hands resting on the thighs, the earth element. Be aware of the upper torso, the chest, the shoulder blades, upper back. Whatever you experience in that area. And move down to the lower torso. Stomach, abdomen, pelvis, lower back, buttocks, Feel the weight, heaviness, earth element. Move the attention to both hips, thighs, lower legs, feet, and toes. Aware of the weight of the legs on the chair or the cushion, and the contact of the feet with the floor. Have a sense of the solidity of the ground below, wherever the body connects with the chair and the cushion. Feel that gravitational pull sinking into the mat, into the earth. Any time that the mind wanders, without any problem, just come back to the body and feel that sense of heaviness or solidity. Have a sense of the body and the breathing. Aware of the breathing and the air flowing into the body and out into space around the body. Just gently bring your attention back to the body and lightly scan through the body, having a sense again of being connected to the body, sitting in the present, knowing the breathing. Feeling kind of connection with the earth. Remembering to be present as best you can, moment to moment. And I'll ring the bell 3 times and sit quietly for a few seconds and just check in with how you're feeling. Perhaps take a bit of a stretch now. When you feel ready to reconnect, open your eyes, move your posture. I'd like now to give a little example of where quite a few years ago, got really stuck in wanting to hold on to the past and not wanting to be in the present and too afraid to move into the future. And just to sort of give an example of what happened in this way, because when I read to you about the First Noble Truth of suffering, grief is suffering, lamentation is suffering, losing someone we love is suffering. And this happened to me well, it's not recently now, it's about 15 years ago when my husband was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of brain tumor and was not given very long to live. And so we started a whole journey together into how to live in a different way and accommodate to what was happening. And what was interesting for me at the time was I'd worked for so many years in hospice and palliative care and thought I really understood what grief was all about. I'd lectured on grief, I'd experienced it in different ways, I'd written about it. But when it actually came to such an intense experience, it was much different. And so grief really is one of the heart's natural responses to loss. It takes courage to grieve, yet through touching it, we can really come face to face with our human vulnerability. Without a healthy way of relating to grief, we can manage and we keep going, but really we won't grow through the sadness. So a healthy way of relating to grief that I have found is to look really softly. It's not a harsh thing. It's just a softly looking at what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, and what we're thinking. And whatever the reason for grief, it's not helpful to add more tension to it by trying to get rid of it or trying to suppress it. So interestingly, at the same time that my husband Ray was diagnosed with this aggressive tumor, I was also looking after my mother in her 90s. And I felt like my whole life became caregiving. And I felt like I needed to be incredibly strong and decisive, when in fact I felt like things were actually falling apart. And I didn't quite know what to do about it. So as the weeks progressed, I was watching Ray let go of so many things in his life, from his driver's license to his ability to speak clearly to his whole independence. And as I saw each loss that he experienced, I felt like my heart actually broke. And I felt like I closed down completely. I thought I had to be strong and somehow believed that being strong meant that I really shouldn't show my feelings. But this really was not helpful. And there's sort of this feeling that it wasn't sustainable, that my body was really rigid, my mind was screaming in resistance to what was happening. And the more I tried to control things, the more things seemed to be out of control. I seemed to be outwardly coping, but actually inwardly, I wasn't coping at all. I wanted to go back in time. I wanted to stop things, and I couldn't be in the present. So interestingly, I think because of the practice, perhaps, and because Ray was deeply involved with the practice as well, at some point I decided to take moments, and I could only do moments, when I would actually just stop what I was doing and just feel what was being felt in the body. And I could feel the earth. I could feel myself being grounded into the earth. Even though I was feeling incredibly rigid, just had to feel I'm just standing here and I can feel the earth. Then I could sort of open to the anxiety or whatever was closed mentally and physically. So I would just stand or I'd walk and I'd just look at the sunshine and watch the clouds and know that in that moment, things were okay. If I looked too far into the future, fear would come up. But if I stayed just where I was, moment to moment to moment, I could manage. It was okay. And I remembered on the first 3-month retreat I did in the 1990s, Joseph Goldstein had said, when things feel overwhelming and you feel like you can't manage, when there's thoughts or emotions that are overwhelming, just notice them, identify them, and then add at the end, and the sky is blue. And that was quite funny for me with my name being Sky, but I always remember when things would get really hard, I'd just look outside and I'd sort of say, and the sky is blue. And somehow that was very calming for me. So turning to open to the pain was really a movement and a big step in healing. And I could see that these habits that I had, these habit patterns of closing down and trying to control, were not helpful at all. But interestingly, just by pausing and by opening for a moment or two, then insights could start to arise. And what I saw was this wall of resistance was not wanting things to be the way they are or the way they were. Absolutely not wanting them to be like that. And that's one of the aspects that the Buddha said is an aspect of dukkha. I didn't want things to be the way they were, and I was afraid of being separated for somebody that I loved. But I realized if I didn't allow these things to come and go, I wouldn't be of any help to myself or my husband. So by taking that time to open, I could just soften and create a space. And through creating the space, then questions started to naturally arise. What is happening and how does it feel in the body? What thoughts and feelings are present? And is it okay for them to be there? And what I found was that my life was unfolding regardless of how I wanted it to be. And there was no perfect way for it to end, actually. And once I accepted that, then things became quite manageable and there was such a sense of relief. I saw my habitual ways of relating to my life and how that it can be so unhelpful at times, and just start to let them go, very gently let them go. And that brought up a lot more compassion and care for myself and for Ray as well, and for everyone, everywhere, who struggles in some way. And I read a lovely story, or a lovely little expression of this, by a woman called Gilda Radner, and she's talking about ambiguity. I wanted a perfect ending. Now I have learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is not about knowing, having to change, taking the moment, and making the best of it. Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it, without knowing what's going to happen next. So this is, I think, what the Buddha was saying, without knowing what's going to happen next. The phrases from those verses that I read: don't hope for the future's not arrived. And this is where we can really look at the thoughts of the future can bring worry or fear or uncertainty. And as I did, perhaps you do as well, keep trying to plan and control and make sure things work in the future just as we want. But in reality, how can we ever be sure what's going to happen, even when we are making plans? And of course, we do need to make plans to a certain extent, or life would be chaotic. But we also need to have the understanding that nothing is certain. The questions that were coming up in my heart, and they didn't need to be answered really. Can I be comfortable knowing that things change and nothing's dependable or certain? And the other thing is, what do I want to develop in the present that will come to fruition in the future? What's important? Knowing the quality of our thoughts and what thoughts are skillful and helpful and what are harmful and unskillful. Whatever we frequently think about, then that becomes the inclination of the mind. So find this for yourself. See if it's true for you. If we keep thinking about negative things, it sets up this pattern that we continue. And sometimes it's very hard to break them. So just watch the inclination of the mind. And so for Ray, what was very worrying for him in his future, which was very immediate, of course, was, would he be okay? Would he still be able to practice? And what would happen to him and his mind? And what was, when he was asking these questions, there was a wonderful Burmese monk that was in Perth running a retreat, and we were spending some time with him, and I was able to ask these questions for Ray. And the Sayadaw reassured Ray that after so many decades of dedication to the Dhamma and the practice, it would stay with him, and he was not to worry. And this was such a relief for him. I have a photo of him with this Sayadaw, and Ray's got his heart on his hand on his heart, and he's really feeling such relief to know that this is true, and it really did prove to be true as well. So the last words from those verses that really have relevance of this: today's the day to do the work. Who knows, tomorrow may bring death, for there is no bargain to be struck with death and his mighty hordes. So I really believe that it is so important to live for today, because we don't know what's going to happen. And I think each one of us has the capacity to be compassionate to have joyfulness, to be kind to people, so that when we are under stress and life isn't turning out as we would wish, we always have these qualities to fall back on. So don't forget that. These are with us and they're very powerful. So some things I'd like to just reflect on and summarize from what we've said so far. We can remember the past or reflect on memories and experiences and not get lost or overwhelmed. We can open to the present with direct awareness and we can live more consciously. And we can look to the future and how we want to be, knowing it's not necessarily going to happen. And we never know when our lives will end, so don't delay in following this path. And a beautiful comment from Joseph Goldstein that I've held with me in my heart for a while. The content of our lives and the process of its unfolding cannot be separated. Having taken birth, we are all doing something, and that something, which is everything we do in our lives, is important precisely because it is part of a bigger picture. Our actions and choices do bear fruit for ourselves, for other people, and for the world. And depending on our mind states, they become the source of either happiness or suffering. This means that in the busyness of our lives, it's up to us to stay awake. So what are we doing? Where are we going? Are we living our lives wisely? And what are we leaving for the future, for future generations on this planet? So I thought that I'd just like to finish, because I think thinking of the future for many of us now, there's a lot of issues around the political instabilities, the climate changes, what's going to happen with all these catastrophes that keep coming in our life, and the instabilities that we feel are present in the world today. And look at, well, what does that mean for the future? After the pandemic and COVID, I think everyone thought life would go back to normal, but it hasn't really gone back to normal. And there's one catastrophe, it seems, after another. And each one of those, I think, brings with it a sense of another loss, be it a loss of towns that are destroyed by earthquakes, for example, or animals that are lost to the world, or plants or birds. And each one of those we might experience a grief. And the grief I think of in terms of, it's a sort of an ambiguous grief because it never comes to end. We have one catastrophe after another and it never has any resolution. Life is often not predictable or dependable, so there never is this resolution, and that makes it really hard. I remember talking to a friend not long ago who was deeply experiencing grief about the world's instability, and particularly about the crisis in the climate change situation. And she was so distraught and overwhelmed by it. And we would sit for hours and we'd talk about what this felt like for the planet and for the future. And she'd struggle because she'd hear and want to feel experience of compassion and kindness and things, but she actually felt hopeless and helpless. And she felt like she could never do enough. The problems felt so vast. And perhaps you feel that sometimes yourself when you're watching the news or in looking towards the future. What can be done? So recently I read an article by Bhante Sujato, actually, and he'd written an article in The Guardian about the climate crisis in 2024, and he wrote it with Nadine Levy, suggesting that we need to realize that the earth is more than a resource for satisfying our desires. Everyone can learn to live a little more simply and be happy. And simplicity, he says, is about how your life expresses itself when you're content. And there's that word contentment again. The Buddha, we know, taught that greed is the problem. And he also suggested that the solution is contentment, when we feel that that just a little is enough. But it's pretty obvious that there's no limit to human craving. So this Buddha set out this clear path, and we can start to see through our practice of sila how we can live more simply. And Ajahn Sujato asks us that it's not just about living our lives more simply, but actually acting to make sure that we can do this on a political and in the social domain. So he wants us to really prioritize acting rather than just hoping. The Buddha taught, as we've been saying, that we create our futures through our actions in the present. So I'll just finish with one reflection from Bhante Sujato. And then we'll ask for some comments and questions. With all our incredible knowledge and capability, we can create a future we're proud of. We can leave a world that is richer, more alive, more wonderful than we found it. In this way, we can embrace the hope that emerges from the way we live and the values we bring to our choices. When you breathe mindfully, you are present. When your heart is content, it becomes still. When you're freed from craving, you sleep at peace. Remember, what we call our breath is air that flows in from the outside, then flows back outside once more. We are moments of the life cycle of each breath. When it is present, calm and flowing, it reminds us that we are present, resting, and it is as if the earth is offering us love. The earth continues to support this body even after all that we have done to it. There is much more we can do when we act from a place of love for the earth and all that it offers us. So thank you for listening to these words, and I hope that some of them have been of help to you in some way this evening.
Thank you too, Sky. It's been a very interesting evening with a wonderful meditation. I'm wondering, would anybody like to offer a comment or to ask a question?
Hi.
Hi, Gloria. Yes.
I really want to say I'm very grateful, and I really appreciate it, people like you sharing like your perspective and your thoughts, because I have to admit, like, sometimes when when I'm like when I'm into a state like I feel like I'm very alone, and then I think about you guys, and I will feel like there are people who will not make my blood vessels feel like breaking every time I talk to them. Yes, this is something that I'm really appreciate of. And I want to say that one thing you say really struck me is like you recognize the past is the past. Because when you say that, I suddenly have a feeling like I know that my past is not yet my past. It's weird because I know that they're in the past, but like when I hear this, that phrase come into my mind, and then suddenly I have a feeling like they are not yet in the past. And then when I'm meditating, I think I think about something like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and then I kind of feel like it's still like it's yesterday, because the pain is like everything is like still so painful for me. Like it's not it's not in the past, because I somehow trying to push them away so hard, but like yes, it's definitely not working. And then I don't know what I don't know how to say it, but like I'm kind of lost sometimes because I feel like the past is my present and then my present is my future.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
And to an extent, you're absolutely right, because the past, of course, it's always living within us. And so somewhere we need to find a way to have a relationship with the past, that we can hold it in a way that's much more skillful, I guess, and more healthy in some ways. So I would suggest that you need to get some support if it feels so real for you, some of these incidences. So perhaps, meditation can help to a certain extent, but sometimes it may be that we need to get other resources that will help us work with that as well. But sometimes just when you're meditating as a practical thing, what I would suggest is, and I've had this feeling as well when I was sitting a lot, when a lot of grief would come up and overwhelm me about things, was, as I was saying, just to sort of sit quietly, and sometimes don't have your eyes closed because the thoughts can feel overwhelming, but to sit and open your eyes and look out a window and just say, and the sky is blue, and I am sitting here now. I am not back there now. I am here, and everything here is okay in this moment. It can be very reassuring for me, and perhaps it might be helpful for you as well to try that. And just those moments, it's not going to answer everything, but just in those moments, notice when the mind is not so contracted and caught, and just you might feel suddenly there's a sense of relief, and you have a big breath and let go of that tension. In that moment, there's a moment of freedom where you're not caught. And just don't miss that moment when you let go for that brief glimpse. I can rest in the moment. And then the next thing might come up. But don't miss those moments when there's a release. Yeah?
It makes sense.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you, Gloria and Sky. I have a comment here in the chat that someone would like a question, actually, Sky. Could I read it out for you?
Of course, yes.
What a story, Sky. I feel you. I wanted to be in a beautiful past too, the beautiful memory of childhood and complete family members. Could you summarize steps we can do to deal with the fear of now and a future of being alone one day?
Well, I think the practice really does help, actually. But sometimes if it's too agitating to sit, and it feels that that's too much quietness to actually sit quietly when these thoughts are coming, I would suggest walking in nature. This walk, I really can't reinforce enough the capacity to meditate when walking and how profound this can be. So to be able to walk and feel the ground and the earth as you walk, and to feel the wind and the coolness and to the space around you and the beautiful sounds that you can hear, or not so beautiful sounds, depending where you're walking, can really help put things in a little bit more perspective. And so you might just check into feeling the movement of your feet as you walk, just the movement and the pressure of the feet. And that's all you can pay attention to. Or you might be aware of the sensations of the body moving through space. And this tends to sort of drop the mind down into the body and away from the repetitive habitual thinking patterns. So what I would say is just here I am. And sometimes I used to come home from work and there'll be a lot of churning and a lot of emotional things happening. And I'd go for a walk along the river, and it would take me 10 or 15 minutes actually to just connect with my body, because I was just lost up here going round, round, round. But eventually I go, and I'm just walking one step after another, and I can hear the sounds of the birds, and I can feel the breeze. And then I would be grounded. take a while. So don't expect it to be happening very quickly, but that would be one way I'd love to suggest. Always, before you sit to meditate, it can be helpful just to walk backwards and forwards a few paces for about 5-10 minutes to really get that connection. Otherwise, we sit down to meditate and I'm still planning and thinking about all these wonderful things, but not really sitting on the cushion or the chair. So I hope that's helpful.
Oh, thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Sky. That was wonderful. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question?
I think Jenny's put her hand up.
Oh, lovely, Jenny, please.
Thank you. Yeah, look, Sky, that was absolutely wonderful. It was so rich, but in particular, planning. And I think during that I realized I am a planner. I always have been. I plan, and I know all the usual reasons. Why do I make lists? I plan. I think another reason I plan is when I'm really not liking things how they are. I'm resisting. It's a form of dealing with that incredible, I don't want it to be like this. And they can be really big things that I don't want. So I completely get lost in distraction. And then my planning is so complicated and convoluted and detailed, and it's like a sort of, it's like a great big notice board with pins all on it. And of course, most of it can never happen anyway, because real life just doesn't happen. Some of it does, some's essential. But that was a fresh insight during your talk into, yes, planning is often soothing for me. I love having lovely things ahead, connecting with beautiful friends, people I love, people I know. But there's also this manic, almost diabolical edge to it too, which is a way of getting out of, not very effectively, a walk. Be a much better idea. Sky, I thank you for that.
Thanks. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for reiterating those words. I had a little smile when you mentioned the word manic, because of the intensity that we often feel that we need at these times. It really is manic, and I get reminded of this by friends sometimes that, oh, Chris, you should just take a moment. And so thank you, Sky, for also addressing this with us this evening.
Great.
Is there anybody else who would like to unmute?
Maybe one question.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much, Sky, for your talk. That was really great. I was wondering, when you said that your husband was so worried about losing all the practice, and that you had that meditation retreat, and then Nabanti said it would stay with him, and that it proved to be true or something like that were your words. So how did that manifest itself, when he said it will stay with him, or the practice for so many years?
I think what happened particularly was that he became very accepting of what was happening. And he went through some periods of feeling very, very frustrated. But I would say, so for me, I guess the basis of my practice has always been mindfulness, along with deepening concentration. But underneath it all, there's been metta. But for him, it's always been mindfulness, but also compassion. And I think the compassion went through to the end. He was also always so happy to see other people that would come to visit him. He wanted to hear their stories, to keep sharing in their life. And so there was an acceptance, but also, I think, a deep compassion with everyone that he came in contact with still. So that was quite a wonderful thing to see, that he could still express that. Mm. Yes. So thanks, Eva. Mm.
Well, Sky, I think we've come to that time. So would you like to either offer us homage to the Triple Gem, or perhaps a blessing, or something to finish?
End it with a blessing, actually.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
So as you continue to walk on this noble path, may you continue to respond to the many forms of suffering in this world and always have faith that you can find inner peace within it.